no president in history has ever wanted to be investigated. No person in history has ever wanted that. But presidents, and I would include Nixon, and I would certainly include Reagan, Bush, and I would include Clinton, all the way up through now, have understood that there does need at times to be some sort of DOJ investigation. It needs to be carried out with some level of independence. Now, various presidents have taken various steps to undermine that, but they've never gotten to the point where Trump is right now of, there will be no investigation of me. Anyone who thinks about it will be fired and maybe prosecuted yourself. But the second thing is, what Democrats did during the 4 years between Trump's presidencies do not excuse or justify what Trump's doing now. But Democrats don't have clean hands here. There's hypocrisy on the Democratic side also. For all the talk of rule of law and all men are created equal and treated equal under the law, I don't think you can support that in an objective sense when you look back at all of the cases that were brought against Trump.
Welcome to Open Book. I am your host, Anthony Scaramucci. Joining us now is best-selling author, CNN legal analyst, and dear friend, Elie Honig. You know, Elie, when you're a lawyer and you pass the bar, you have to take continuing education credits.
Yeah.
I feel like your books are continuing education for me. I mean, I'm learning more from your books than I did in law school.
Yeah, go ahead.
Say it.
I'm so glad to hear you say that. And by the way, I'm going to make a petition to the New Jersey and Pennsylvania bars where I'm admitted that I should get credit. Like, I shouldn't have to sit through some webinar. I wrote this book. That should count.
I'm with you. There's a lot of content in here. Okay, so the title of your new book, and you wrote two great books prior to this one, but the title of the new book is When You Come at the King, Inside DOJ's Pursuit of the President from Nixon to Trump. And so obviously we know the other part of that cliche, when you come at the king,
you best not miss.
You better not miss.
Yeah, exactly.
And so you got some great stories in here. So it's always great to have you back on Open Book. You called the special counsels the ultimate test of American justice. Why did you write that? And why did you write this story right now when accountability for presidents, particularly President Trump, it feels more fragile than ever?
So I think there's two reasons, Anthony. First of all, these cases are the most important cases that we've seen in this country over the last half century. I mean, there's a chapter basically for each of the main cases, from Watergate to Iran-Contra to Clinton and Ken Starr, all the way up through the Mueller, Durham, Jack Smith cases. And, we have just come through a period where we've had a glut of these. There was a point where we had 5 of them basically in about a half decade, which was historically unusual. And I thought, well, I think we need to get inside these cases, which I do in this book. I talked to 36 people who were actually involved in the cases: prosecutors, defense lawyers, witnesses, White House officials. And what lesson can we draw from it? And then the second thing, to your point, Anthony, it couldn't have come out at a better time. What we see Donald Trump doing now, day by day basis, even just this past few days when Trump is ordering Pam Bondi, that I want you to indict 𝗕cie James, I don't care really what the evidence is making the point, and this goes to the title of the book, that what the Trump administration is doing now is pure payback. It's retribution. It's when you come at the king, you best not miss. And I don't mean to, and I don't celebrate that. I use this descriptively. In fact, in the book, I argue this is incredibly dangerous. This is a complete misuse of DOJ's prosecutorial power. And really what's happened now is Trump has kicked down the wall of independence that used to define DOJ to keep it what it was.
I feel like, I want to test something on you. I was reading your book, and I said, I feel like if Trump had won re-election, we wouldn't be in the trouble that we're in. Hear me out for a second.
In 2020, you mean?
Yeah, he had a lot of Republicans still on the playing field with him. I mean, traditional Republicans. He was still adhering to some basic ideas about the presidency. You wouldn't have had the big insurrection, the January 6th disaster,
right,
which is now in the public lore. We'll call it the insurrection, but it also called into question and made many Americans question their own election integrity, which is exactly what our adversaries would like us to do in the country. I feel like if he just won, he would have served his 4 years very sloppily, lots of Twitter explosions and craziness, and it would have been over.
It's an interesting
And now we have this sort of 10-year yoke over us. Am I wrong in thinking
it's
that?
An interesting counterfactual, because for two reasons. One, if you compare Trump 2, which we're in now, to Trump 1, there's big differences. I mean, Trump 1, he did a lot of the things that you just talked about, Anthony. And my first book was about Bill Barr, his primary attorney general during those years, his second AG during those years. And, while Trump would have these temper tantrums and say, I want to see John Kerry indicted. I want to see Barack Obama indicted, Hillary Clinton, Andy McCabe. Maybe you, Anthony. I don't know if he maybe fired one of those at
Well,
you.
he
It
hasn't,
wouldn't
he hasn't,
shock
he
me.
hasn't come for me yet. I'm too much of a piker, but
Right, right,
I think if he wins the midterms, he's going to put some people in jail for sure.
right. So
I think that's the next move.
and that's the
Jail
thing.
time for some of these people.
This was talk during the first term, but nobody did it. Bill Barr basically just ignored him, as did others, and nobody was indicted. But now Trump seems like he's serious, and he seems like in Pam Bondi, he has a person who's willing to do it. I think the second part of considering your counterfactual, what if Trump had won in 2020? I mean, yeah, I don't think all these criminal cases, they certainly would not have landed while he was president in this scenario from 2020 up through, January of 2025. There wouldn't have been a January 6th. Who knows, with the classified documents, he wouldn't have been a private citizen. So, and I do argue in the book, I want to make clear, like, the book is not some sort of anti-Trump screed. I'm critical of Trump and the way he's done this, but I'm also not afraid to be critical in the book of some of the things that were done to get Donald Trump. The Jack Smith chapter has some criticisms of Merrick Garland and Jack Smith. I don't argue that they were acting in the same way that Trump is, but their hands are not clean either. There were things that they did that were inappropriate, that were clearly designed to go after Trump in a way you would not have gone after a normal person.
So that brings the hypocrisy question. Again, these are questions I've been dying to ask you since I closed the book. So we rail on free speech, unless you're saying something that we like, Democrats and Republicans. A great op-ed today in the New York Times about that. Additionally, we don't want you to pick winners. I mean, we don't want you to tell you who's going to be the TikTok investors, but yet Democrats make an investment in Solyndra. It goes to zero. And there's whataboutisms now on both sides where, they go after each other in a way that I don't think they previously went after each other. Maybe I'm wrong. You point out Nixon, you give up other situations, the Iran-Contra, things like that.
Right.
But it just seemed like it was tamer, Elie, or was I just younger and more naive?
No,
or you tell me.
It was different. I mean, it used to be that, and again, I talked to Watergate prosecutors, Iran-Contra prosecutors, both sides of the Clinton Starr case. It used to be, look, no president in history has ever wanted to be investigated, right? No person in history has ever wanted that. But presidents, and I would include Nixon, and I would certainly include Reagan, Bush, and I would include Clinton, all the way up through now, have understood that there does need at times to be some sort of DOJ investigation. It needs to be carried out with some level of independence. Now, various presidents have taken various steps to undermine that, but they've never gotten to the point where Trump is right now of, there will be no investigation of me. Anyone who thinks about it will be fired and maybe prosecuted yourself. But the second thing is, and I think what Democrats did during the 4 years between Trump's presidencies do not excuse or justify what Trump's doing now. But Democrats don't have clean hands here. There's hypocrisy on the Democratic side also. For all the talk of rule of law and all men are created equal and treated equal under the law, I don't think you can support that in an objective sense when you look back at all of the cases that were brought against Trump. I mean, before we get into the criminal stuff, the 𝗕cie James case, look, I don't think 𝗕cie James should be indicted now. I don't think there's a case there. Todd Blanche doesn't think there's a case there. But her lawsuit against Trump was ridiculous. And I said this many times, Anthony, publicly, I'm sure probably with you. She ran for office on Vote for Me and I'll nail Trump. She goes, I don't know what, something, I'll sue him, I'll indict him for money laundering. She brings this ridiculous lawsuit. And just the other day, a liberal appeals court in New York throws out the whole financial penalty for exactly the reasons I was saying. There was no real victim. So now he's still liable, but the financial penalty has been zeroed out now. That's quite a rebuke. I think the Alvin Bragg hush money case was ridiculous. It certainly backfired politically. I think that'll get thrown out. And I think if you look at, I'm not even going to talk about 𝗕anie Willis. That case was a joke and sidetracked itself. And then even if you look at Jack Smith, there are things that he did that you would never have done to anyone else. I'll give you one example. Jack Smith indicts Trump on January 6th, as he should have, in my view. But then Smith says, now Smith's up against this mad dash against the clock because he wants to try Trump before the 2024 election. But the problem is DOJ wasted so much time. It took him 2.5 years to indict this guy. So Jack Smith says, I want to try him 5 months from the indictment. 5 months from the indictment, Anthony. This is a case with $13 million pages of discovery. There is no physical way Donald Trump could exercise his right to effective defense counsel. They could not have gone through 13 million pages in 5 months. The average case, I looked this up in DC, your average gun drug case gets 2 years and 4 months, 28 months to prep for trial. And Jack Smith made a straight face argument. He needs to go to trial within 5 months. The reason was the election, of course, but he wouldn't say it. And so there was some disingenuousness and hypocrisy from Democrats as well. Now, that doesn't justify Trump firing back 10 times greater as he's doing now, but Dems can't claim clean hands here either.
So was Archibald Cox, was he at Harvard Law School when you were there, or he had already left?
Are you kidding? Archibald Cox was like taught in the 70s. I was born in 75.
Okay. No, Archibald Cox was there when I was
maybe he
there.
went back. I guess he went back. You're right.
Yeah, he went back.
Actually,
back.
I take back my little laugh there. He might have been there in 2000 when I was there. I don't know. Yeah, you're right.
All right, well, anyway, he was there when I was there. He gave a big speech about the Saturday Night Massacre. So for the young listeners that don't know who even Archibald Cox is, tell us who Archibald Cox is. You wrote great stories about him and what is known as the Saturday Night Massacre. Tell us what that is.
There's so much great color. So Archibald Cox gets brought in under political, Nixon's under political fire. He agrees to bring in Cox as the as the special prosecutor for Watergate. And I talked to two people who were on Cox's team. They were 30 and 26 at the time. Now they're in their 70s and 80s. Jill Wine-Banks and Jim Quarles. Cox was this venerated Harvard Law professor. Quarles had been his student. And the investigation was starting to make real inroads towards Nixon. And then on this Saturday night in October of 1973, he orders his AG, Elliot Richardson, to fire Cox. Richardson refuses. The deputy AG refuses. William Ruckelshaus, they both resign. So you lose your top two officials. And then Cox gets fired anyway. So those three all get decapitated. Jill Wine-Banks tells me a great story that I have in the book about how she experienced the Saturday Night Massacre. She was at a wedding. She said she couldn't get a day off for weeks and months at a time. Finally, that Saturday, she got to go to New York City for a family wedding. She comes back at midnight. This is before the era of phones. The desk clerk jumps out and hands her a message that says, "The office has been seized. Return immediately." So next morning, she goes down. It's a Sunday morning now. She's there. Quarles is there. The other prosecutors are there. And they don't know what's going on. They don't know. They know Archibald Cox has been fired, but they don't know if, are we fired? Is this continuing? And they're all sort of sitting there. The office has actually been roped off with police tape. And Cox comes in. I guess they let him back in. They never let him back in now, but at the time they let him back in, I guess, to clear out his desk or something. And he comes into the prosecutors and he tells them, don't give him what he wants, meaning Nixon. You stay here and you finish the job. Robert Bork comes in. Robert Bork gets blamed a lot of times. I think it's unfair. I think actually Robert Bork was a hero in this because he stopped the bleeding and he made sure Leon Jaworski got appointed. A lot of the historians I spoke to actually agree with me. Jaworski becomes a special counsel and then ultimately leads to the subpoena, the Supreme Court case, and Nixon resigns. So, the Saturday Night Massacre, it's sort of miraculous, but because of the integrity and the courage of these prosecutors, the case carried on and led to Nixon's resignation. I'll tell you real quick, Anthony, a funny story that they told me that's in the book. There was a restaurant, which apparently is still there in D.C., across the street from their offices, which were near DuPont Circle, called Archibald's. And one day, Archie Cox, again, this very starched, patrician guy, says, we should go to lunch there. That place is named after me. It's called Archibald's. That's my name. And they're like, yeah, Archie, that's a strip club. I don't think we should go there. So
he should have gone there. It would have probably loosened them up a little bit. He was pretty uptight. When I was there. The interesting thing about Bork, this predated you a little, but when I was in school, constitutional law scholar, Professor Lawrence Tribe, was battling to block Robert Bork from getting on the court.
Yeah.
He was nominated by Ronald Reagan, and they successfully blocked him from getting on the court.
Well, and part of what was used against him, part of it was his ideology was deemed too extreme, but his involvement in Watergate. And I'll tell you something about the book. So we commonly look at Bork as the villain of the Saturday Night Massacre, right? The guy who came in and carried out Nixon's order. But if you do the research, both the AG, Elliot Richardson, and the deputy AG, both guys who resigned later, years later, said, oh, no, we asked Bork to do that. We begged him to stay because we knew the bloodletting had to stop at some point. There was actually no chain of command within DOJ after Bork. Bork had nothing to do with Watergate until this. And Bork felt misled later. And I asked Garrett Graff, who's a great Watergate historian, and he said, no, I agree with you. I think Bork is misremembered. I think he was a hero. And I will tell you, since the book came out, I got a note from Robert Bork's son who said basically, I thank you. Like, I feel like our father has not been remembered correctly through history. So, Bork was like this gruff guy with the goatee and everything, and he had very sharp conservative views. But when it comes to Watergate, he's miscast as the villain.
But it's the early stages of villainization in our society, right?
Yeah.
Because that's what we do to each other. We two-dimensionalize people, Elie, and we go hard. And so the left-wing media went hard at him. The right-wing media goes hard at George Soros.
Yeah.
Listen, I've been on Wall Street for 37 years, Elie. George Soros was always looked up to on Wall Street.
Yeah.
You know who worked for George Soros? 𝗕𝗵𝗄𝘁𝗵,
Huh.
Stephen Mnuchin, Stanley Druckenmiller.
So interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, they all went to work
It just
for him.
becomes
I
a
mean,
buzzword. They just say the word Soros. And,
because he went against Cheney during the Iraqi war, and so the conservatives said, "We're going to do to George Soros what the hard left did to Robert Bork."
Yeah. I mean, and look,
and
there's
so
a verb
they
now.
villainize and demonize.
If you look at the Urban Dictionary, to get borked is actually a word now. It means basically to get demonized in that way. Yeah.
All right. Well, if I'm going to get borked, I'm going to wear protection, Elie. Okay. I just want to let you know that. Okay. Let's go to what Robert Ray said to you. Everyone loves the idea of an outside prosecutor until one gets appointed at them.
Right.
So what a true line, right? I mean, so evidential in your book.
Yeah. So look,
because these guys are like, yeah, we're going to have a special prosecutor. And then when it starts picking and probing at them, they flip out.
I mean, Bill Clinton signed the final reauthorization of the independent counsel law in 94. George H.W. Bush, I have in the book, actually told the guy he had just beaten 2 years before, actually said to him, I would not recommend signing that. Like, this law is a problem. And Clinton, I don't know if he wanted to or not, but he obviously felt like he had no choice. And what ends up happening, he becomes the receiving end of the whole Ken Starr thing. But I certainly do not argue in this book that special counsels or independent counsels are perfect. They're highly, vastly imperfect. A lot of this book is exposing that. But I also think we do need some sort of mechanism in place so we don't end up with no check on the president like we have now. Bob Ray is an interesting figure because he ends up replacing Ken Starr. Ken Starr starts off with Whitewater, which is just these real estate deals in Arkansas. He's not getting anywhere. He gets some people around the Clintons, but not the Clintons themselves. And I talked to David Kendall in the book, who represented Bill Clinton, and Lanny Brewer, who was a White House lawyer at the time. And they both said he was just hanging on, waiting for something. And then Monica Lewinsky emerges like manna from heaven for him. I actually also talked to a guy named Saul Weisenberg, who was Ken Starr's number 2. Starr died a few years ago. And Saul was very candid. He said, I was on a detail that was supposed to run out in February of 98. And I felt like we were playing out the string. But the Monica stuff hit in January of 98. And I thought, ooh, now I'm going to stick around. This is getting good. So, of course, it all spins vastly out of control, becomes an impeachment, becomes ridiculous. They're horrible. Both sides are horrible in their treatment of Monica Lewinsky. And it ends up basically killing the independent counsel law because both sides hated it. I mean, Clinton survives the impeachment. He leaves with a record high approval rating. Democrats hate it. Republicans hate it. And it lapses. But anyway, Bob Ray takes over the case at the very end, the last year or so. And he was in an interesting position because by this point, everyone was done with this case. The impeachment was over. And Bob said to me, but we still had a problem. We had to decide if we're going to prosecute Bill Clinton for perjury. And I said, you're kidding me. There's no way you would have indicted him. Bob goes 95% of the way in the book to saying that he would have if he had to. He said to me, all the pieces were in place. But he ends up having this, and I detail this in the book, a dramatic not one-on-one, but face-to-face meeting with Clinton in the map room of the White House, like 20 days before Clinton leaves office, and says, we need you to admit that you were untruthful. We need you to pay a fine, and we need you to lose your bar license. And basically, Clinton agrees to that on his last day in office. But Bob Ray basically makes clear to me that if Clinton had not agreed to that, he would have indicted. And I said, Bob, you would have lost. You would have lost in 2 seconds. And he goes, maybe, but I felt like I was going to do what I have to do. But Bob understands that the idea of a special counsel is lovely in theory until you're on the receiving end of one.
So let me ask you this, because I've another big question for me. The presidential immunity case, would Nixon, under that ruling, have gotten in trouble?
Ooh, see, I love that question because what I argue in the book is the ruling is very broad and vague, and no question will make it harder for people in the future to prosecute presidents. but there still is conduct that can be prosecuted. And I think my argument would be what Nixon did there would be prosecutable because he was in on, to some extent, the break-in. He knew of it, or he knew of it shortly thereafter. He was in on the cover-up, but that's political. If your political arm is committing crimes or whatever, that's pretty clearly, even that is outside the scope of the immunity ruling. It would be a little oddly, it would probably be worse conduct, but actually more within the immunity ruling if he was using his own cabinet members or federal executive branch officials to commit these crimes. But the fact that he was doing it with private citizens engaged in political activity, so that's a great example. Like, some people say no president could ever be prosecuted again. I don't think that's true. I think if you really look at the immunity opinion, there is plenty of conduct that can still be prosecuted. I do argue in the book that the immunity decision went way too far, but I also argue that doesn't mean everyone should just give up on accountability for all time.
I've heard, and I want you to react to this. I've heard that the Supreme Court's afraid of Trump. I've heard that Roberts is worried that he's going to render a decision against Trump and Trump is going to flip him the bird and he's going to get no support from the Congress or other elements of the government. Do you think that that's bogus?
I don't buy that. I don't think the Supreme Court is like loves Trump. You'll hear something, oh, these guys, I mean, maybe Alito and Thomas, but no, I mean, there's very little Trump can do to them. The only thing he could really do is defy one of their orders and sort of bring us into this crisis moment. But he's had chances to do that. And while he has defied the spirit of some of the orders, including those early immigration orders, he hasn't quite stepped over the line of overtly defying an explicit order from the Supreme Court. So I don't think they're afraid of him. I think I can understand they're concerned he might do that, but I don't think they're pulling punches or doing him favors because of that.
All right, just want to throw that out.
Look,
there
they rule against him a lot. They rule against. There's this notion out there of, oh, they're always no. They've ruled against Trump quite a bit.
Give me one example where they ruled against him.
Several of the immigration cases where they said you have to give people due process that he wasn't giving. Some of the firing cases and the withholding of federal funding cases, they've said you can't do that. They ruled against him on his tax returns when he got subpoenaed for his tax returns. They refused to block Jack Smith from releasing his special counsel report. Like, there's a lot. I mean, he's done well with the Supreme Court, but it's not like he's gone undefeated with them or they've always sided with him. By the way, I should say, I know you're financially focused. I believe they're going to strike down the tariffs too. That's coming up in November.
Yeah, I mean, so you're reading my mind because I'm dying to ask you that question. So
this is not investment advice. Let me make clear.
Right.
So I don't, but I think that case, we know the Supreme Court is expediting and hearing it in November. I think they'll probably rule by the new year, right around then. And Trump has lost the first two rounds of this in the district court and the Court of Appeals. And I think what Trump has done in passing these tariffs actually violates conservative principles because Congress holds tariff power, not the president. If Congress is going to delegate a power like that, they can, but they have to do it clearly and unambiguously in a statute. And this statute that Trump has used, the 𝗖𝗵𝗲𝗰, the Emergency Economic Powers Act, International Economic Emergency Powers Act, A, arguably doesn't cover tariffs at all, and B, isn't specific enough. So I think if you use traditionally conservative legal principles, he loses. I mean, definitely the three liberals will be against him because they always are, almost no matter what. And I think he's going to lose at least two of the conservatives. If I had to guess, don't invest based on this, folks. I know a lot of you wealthy Wall Street people will listen to Anthony, but if I had to guess, I would guess it's going to get struck down.
Okay, but no, there's big consequences to that. That means there's $1 trillion or so of tax revenue, because that's all tariffs are. I mean, the president is telling the biggest lie of lies. He says, well, the countries are paying the tariffs.
No, it's the importers.
The consumer is paying the tariffs.
Well, the importers pay it and pass it to the consumer. Yeah.
Of course.
Yeah.
Of course. It's a consumption tax. Yeah. We both know this. Yeah. So what happens? They have to return the money to the people that they
I think the answer is that the importers can actually try to recover the money they've paid. Yes. There is some case law.
But on a going forward basis, the tariff nonsense, him coming down from evil Mount Evil with the like Orange Moses
Right. I
with
know
the
what the
tablet.
tablets.
All of that stuff's going away. Then
Yeah, I
you're
mean,
saying.
there are some tariffs that are separate from the ones he announced on Liberation Day back in April. There are some on certain types of raw materials and things that could stay in place because he's done them under different legal guidance, legal authority. But those whole Liberation Day tariffs, if the Supreme Court strikes them down, they're all dead. So, I'm sure the financial industry and markets will be watching that case more than probably any case
Yeah,
in a long
the
time.
market's not set up for that. Just so you know, the market expects the Supreme Court to rule with them.
Oh, is that right?
So yeah, I think so.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's how the market's
Hmm.
acting. I mean, that's my prediction.
Okay.
Yeah, I hope you're right. I think it's been insanely stupid to do this.
Yeah.
So, you know, are you more optimistic or more pessimistic and cynical about America and holding the powerful to account
Yeah.
after writing this book?
I think I'm more optimistic than the average person, right? I mean, I think a lot of people have sort of gone to the point of no one's ever going to be held accountable. But I think if it's done in a measured and fair way, I propose a policy at the end of this, a way we can sort of change the way we structure these special counsel cases to yield better results and more permanency. But I think we can still hold people to account. I think Trump has defied the rules in a lot of ways, has defied the normal laws of gravity. I also think some of the Democratic missteps and oversteps, this is really the subject of my second book, undermine the effort to bring him to justice. The second book I wrote in 2022, while all these Trump cases were about to get started, I said he's in the book, basically, he's going to get indicted probably more than once. And everyone's telling you he's going to go to jail and the walls are closing in, but it's not going to be as easy as you think. And here's why. And that ended up all being true. But I still do think we can, it's not going to have, look, let's be real. It's not like this administration over the next 3 years is going to have some sudden epiphany and go, oh yeah, we need to allow for better accountability. But this book is largely a pitch to whoever comes next, be it a Republican or Democrat, J.D. Vance or, Kamala Harris or Gavin Newsom or whoever, that this can work. We can have, and we do have a history, not a perfect history, but a history of meaningful accountability through this idea of special counsel or outside prosecutors. There's things we need to do to change it, but I'm not ready to give up on accountability for all time.
All right. So you've done this podcast before. I've got 5 words I want to present to you, and I want you to react to them. Okay, you ready?
Yes.
I say the word Nixon. You say what?
I can respond in more than one word.
Yeah, of course.
Got meaningful accountability imposed on him because of brave prosecutors.
Clinton.
Abused his power, mistreated Monica Lewinsky, but ultimately was over pursued by Ken Starr.
Okay. Joe Biden.
Biden was fairly exemplary when it came to his respect for the independent Justice Department until he pardoned his own son and blamed politics in a Trumpian statement. I think that pardon undermined Joe Biden's legacy. After telling us for months he would do no such thing because he respected the justice system. Yeah.
And that was probably not an auto pen pardon. Let's put it that way. All right. How about Trump?
Has gotten away with almost everything and will redefine the way that we look at the justice system and accountability from here on.
Yeah, and Democrats, trust me, there will be ambitious Democrats that take advantage of and study Trump's playbook. Yeah. So, all right, let's go to the last 2 words, special counsel. You say what?
Imperfect, but better than any other system and can be improved.
I learned that from you, actually. I didn't really understand the mechanisms of it, but you have to do that. I guess I'm wondering if the whole Justice Department at this point should be a special counsel, meaning
well, look,
should it get moved out of the executive branch? I don't know where you put it. I'm not saying you could put it in the judicial branch, but you got to get it away from the powers that be, particularly if they have to examine at times the powers that be.
I mean, that's sort of my proposal with respect to special counsel, that it needs to be more insulated, but you also can't be politically unaccountable. We can't have prosecutors doing whatever they want with no consequence, but there are models for that. And I will tell you, I pulled it from not only scholarly articles, but from these people. Like I asked the lawyers, the players. What rules do you think worked and didn't work, and what would you like to see happen? But I agree with you. I would like to see some sort of, you can't pull it out of the executive branch entirely, but I would like to see it more independent, more insulated.
Well, listen, the book is awesome. When you come at the king, inside DOJ's pursuit of the president, from Nixon to Trump. I'm sorry I don't have the book in front of me. I would also hold it. Hold it up, Elie. Hold it up. Hold the book up. I was looking for the book this morning, but I have it at home.
There you go.
And love the book.
Thank
It's from
you.
Elie Honig. Thank you so much for joining us once again on Open Book.
Great to see you, Anthony. Thank you very much.